Hello and welcome to TelecomTV. We're on tour. We're in Dusseldorf in Germany. We are at the SDN and OpenFlow World Congress 2014. I'm Martin Warwick and I'm talking with an old friend of TelecomTV, Andrew Coward, who is VP for Service Provider Strategy at Brocade. Andrew, great to see you.
Good to see you again.
A lot of people here with jet lag. You're one of them.
I am.
But you're doing well. We'll keep you awake for the next 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Last time we talked, we were talking about the theory of software networking, the fact that it's feasible, possible, and is going to happen. Now it has. We're moving on to sort of real use time, and we're seeing hardware being replaced by software. Where does Brocade fit into all that?
Well, you're right, exactly right. I mean, I think a year ago we were trying to figure out what were the first use cases.
That's right.
And Brocade, we'd actually been providing software networking into the cloud service providers and allowing them to kind of start moving from traditional hardware firewalls and routers and switches into software. And so what we've been able to do is kind of translate that experience into the carrier space. And that's particularly kind of worked out in the transformation of connectivity for what's the customer premises equipment, or moving functions from what were traditionally employed in the enterprise directly with appliances and placing that into the cloud. And that was kind of our expertise in the cloud service providers, and that's really what we're seeing translate and get traction in the carrier space today.
Now you're speaking here at the World Congress on that, practical steps to virtualize CE and PE network functions. So what are the practical steps? How do you go about it from toddler stage onwards?
Yeah, I think that's one of the kind of challenges in this space. The cloud service providers have deep skills in terms of their own development teams, their own integration teams. And you can kind of see a lot of the components that are being built in the software networking space, almost like Lego bricks. And so in the cloud service provider space, we kind of just provided a couple of Lego bricks and they kind of plugged them together and they kind of built the Millennium Falcon or whatever it was that they were trying to build. In the carrier space, they're kind of looking for the instruction set that kind of goes along with the Lego. And so a lot of the challenges and a lot of the kind of things that we have to do through that to kind of create these steps, if you like, is figure out what all those components are. So for example, it's not just good enough to have a piece of software that you can run on a server, you have to be able to provision that. And if you're going to provision that, you have to allow users and customers to be able to configure things on it, not necessarily with a CLI and all the complicated ways we used to do that, but with the point-and-click interfaces that they're used to seeing from the cloud service providers, essentially. So all of that Lego bricks or glue, to use another analogy, has to get provided. And has to get delivered, and part of it is what we as a Brocade can deliver, part of what the industry and the open source community can deliver in other vendors, and partly what the carriers themselves have to build. And kind of sorting all of that out is kind of an interesting challenge and an opportunity at the moment. And so our job really is to, okay, what are all these layers, how do we deliver them, how can we provide the complete end-to-end solution through that?
NFV in particular, of course, SDN to some extent is predicated on open source interoperability and so on, because the old model is dead and dying. How easy do you think it's going to be for what you've just been talking about, for all this to be knitted together in a satisfactory, workable fashion pretty quickly?
Yep, so I think in the old world, if you like, a lot of this standards work was about telling people how things should interoperate. And then having somebody write something to that specification that complied with that. In this new model, we're seeing a kind of, not a tell me, but a show me model, meaning that the way to move forward is to actually write code, either publish that in open source community in one sense, or have that as part of a solution that you then build out. And that's starting to move things forward. And so, for example, Open Daylight, something that Brocade's very committed to, is a really good example of a show me view. And so the open in this new world is really about kind of creating these Lego bricks, which software-wise, which can then talk and speak and communicate to other things, as rather than these kind of legacy blocks of hardware who were opened from an interface perspective, but they were a closed system internally. And that's the biggest change, is kind of the devolution of that big block of hardware into the constituent parts.
There's a real cauldron of alphabet soup bubbling away now. I mean, it's usual in this industry, but this is a cracker, the latest ones. I mean, I'm fairly well steeped in this, like the alphabet soup, but goodness gracious me, the things I've never heard of before. We've now got VBRAS, as you tell me it is, because I thought it was going to be VBRAS, virtual bras, or something different from VBRAS. So that's Virtual Broadband Remote Access Server. There's carrier-grade network address translation. And all the bits and pieces that go with it. There's a huge number of new acronyms and new sets of initials that are coming into play. Do people understand them?
Well, all these things existed before. They just didn't have the little V in front of them previously.
True. Yeah.
And these things kind of evolved over time. And so essentially we're now saying all of these components, all these these little Lego bricks, if you like, that were functions inside the traditional products are now pieces of software, either one continuous piece of software or individual components, now virtualized. But what we're seeing, though, is there's a sequence of things that the industry is kind of reaching to do first,
right.
Things that are relatively easy or simpler than some of the more complex functions. And so as we kind of look at the industry and say, well, what goes first in this? And to use one of those acronyms, the CPE, virtualizing that CPE function, placing that into the cloud, and we created another one through that called VCE, because there's no premise if you put it into the cloud. Right.
So it's not customer premises equipment, it's customer virtual equipment.
Right, or virtual customer equipment, that's right.
Yeah.
So those are I guess that's part of the kind of leading to the alphabet soup that's there. So then the question is kind of separating the hype from the reality about what can really kind of get delivered in that.
Indeed.
And also how some of these things start plugging together, and again,
in a meaningful way.
To add confusion to this, so when you take virtual customer equipment and then you merge that together with virtual premises equipment, which is what the carrier was doing previously with MPLS, and you then have that in one virtual machine, you've now brought a number of components together into a kind of big alphabet soup, or to use my preferred analogy, Lego bricks that are now stacking together to create a complete solution.
Okay, well, yeah, we're going to have to live with it, aren't we? That's what's going to happen, and we know that what comes out of the end, all being well, will be very good. But what are the realities now, Andrew, of NFV app standards, trials and so on? I know you have a proof of concept here at the event. There's a hall full of POCs, the POC zone. What's Brocade doing there? What are you showing? What proof of concept is it? Who are you working with?
Yep, so we've done a couple of POCs, and you know, this is the thing with this industry right now. It's now about cooperation, if not competition, through it. So the server vendors, Intel, software vendors, virtualization vendors, and so on. So they all come together. And as you start putting these Lego bricks together, you start creating interesting solutions. So for example, one of the demonstrations today is preventing distributed denial of service attacks, or to use another acronym, DDoS, and using software networking to start to address that as one example. But one of the fundamentals that we've seen in any of these, regardless of what POC it is or what actual deployment we're seeing, is kind of taking this to a high performance level. And so one of the fundamentals that we kind of realized as we migrated from the cloud service providers to the carriers was there's an expectation of performance and speed that really has been not available, frankly, in software networking until now. And so one of the things that we were able to prove through this, and this testing that shows this today, is how fast we can make an Intel server run when it's doing this. And if you think about it, if you bring 10 gigabit interfaces into an Intel server, you kind of hope that it's going to fill those pipes. That's certainly what happens with legacy products. And so we had Telefonica recently do a press release with us that demonstrated that out of a single Intel server, you could drive about 80 gig of throughput from a single Intel product. And what that really said was, for the first time, you can apply this technology and compete directly with what was a legacy product. And that benchmark is where we are today. And you only have to see, if you ride the Intel curve, that will only get more, if that's the right term. It will grow.
Right.
So fundamentally then, you kind of have to meet the performance benchmarks before you have the right to show that you can do any of these applications. Otherwise, it's just a demo and not a real-world deployable solution.
And we have seen, no names, no pack drill, but we have seen, or I have seen over my life in this industry, instances where a demo has not really been a demo at all. It's all been fixed beforehand and it isn't real. This is not the case here. I've seen these and these are all real and they're running, and of course yours is as well.
And so then the trick is to say, okay, well that's great, so that works as a single instance. How do I make that work for 1 million users, 10 million users, 100 million users? And so together with some of the server vendors, it becomes a case of how do you bring this together in pods of servers, how do you put the provisioning tools together so you know that if you buy 100 servers, you get a certain capacity of networking function, capabilities and availability. And I think that's actually the next piece of work that the industry has to do, having kind of got all these clever ideas and new ways of combining these Lego bricks. Okay, now then, how do we basically size that? And sizing challenges, by the way, have always been problematic when you're talking about flexible server hardware and different CPU capabilities and different memory and so on. So being able to nail down this server has this capability with this NFV function is something that's really a critical piece and next step.
Hopefully we're seeing the hype phase of NFV and SDN receding into the distant past, and a new order looms. So does reality in front of us. This is the third iteration of this event. Darmstadt, 300 people a couple of years ago. Bad Homburg last year. Bigger, more vital again. Fantastic this year. Tremendous. It's going great guns. Who knows how much bigger it can possibly get. Question is, what ways do you think, Andrew, the industry perceptions and expectations have changed over the past couple of years? Where we started in Darmstadt and where we are today in Dusseldorf, a great difference. Have people been surprised by the expectations? Have they been able to understand what they are? Are there any changes?
Well, I think, as it's obviously seen, most people in the industry seem to have got the memo that this is changing. Right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I don't think traditional vendors, including Brocade, by the way, in the early days, was really understanding how quickly this would move or how aggressively the carriers would really push this. And the persistence that they've shown, certainly the top 5-10 carriers in driving this, the ways that we've seen RFIs and RFPs kind of show up and expectations that basically held the vendor community to account in a way that they hadn't been held to account in terms of driving industry forward. And I haven't seen this level of change really since the move to IP networks, which was really when I started in my networking career. And so that shift is really the kind of the acceleration that we've seen that drives this. So then to get to the hype question, or part of the implied question that you asked, I still think we are, in many ways, still in somewhat of hype, right? And so it's down to the reality of, certainly for the vendors here, how can you prove that what you have is deployable, does scale, and so on?
Right.
And the one test isn't sufficient to do that,
No.
and that's really what we're seeing. The other part that kind of moves it from hype to reality is how we integrate with legacy. And the legacy products are not going away as much as I personally would like them to go away quickly. And so legacy OSS, BSS systems for management and billing, those have to be integrated, working with existing equipment. For example, one of the customers we were working with told us they had qualified 40 different CPE devices today. Now, I don't know at what point 10 seemed like a really big number and they'd stop, or 15 or 20, but they kind of got to 40. All of that product has to be capable of connecting into the new environment, this new virtualized environment, because that stuff may take 3 years to be phased out.
Absolutely, it's a tall order. Yeah.
So there's a lot of moving parts here, and as soon as we kind of clear one obstacle, we kind of find the next one. And I think as an industry, we're still kind of clearing our way through, kind of a snowplow kind of clearing through cobwebs. That's a bad analogy, isn't it? Clearing through snowdrifts of problems, if you like, to get to the destination where we can say, yep, we can tie. We've replaced the middle, but the edges of this necessarily are still legacy. But we've saved the capex, we've saved the operational costs, and we've introduced new services as a consequence.
So, Andrew, then briefly in summary, where do you think the emphasis should be?
Yep. So, I mean, we see the first services that can evolve and we alluded to this as being moving customer premise equipment functions into the cloud. And the reason for that is that those are some of the simplest things to make the migration and get the most impact on cost savings and operational savings, and indeed introduce new services, because those are the places that are particularly difficult for carriers to deploy today because of the expense, because of the truck roll. They also have the benefit of emulating what the new competition for carriers is coming from the cloud service providers, and so the first thing you have to do is kind of emulate if you're going to succeed, while having a lot more kind of value in terms of the last mile and control of the services and the quality that kind of entails because of the carrier value that's there.
Informative stuff. Andrew Coward, thank you.
Thank you very much.